My name is Lisa. I will be moderating this session, and since all of our bios are in chat, we can just start directly with presentations. So Ryan, you're first.
All right, terrific. Thank you. Okay, so the title of my presentation today. Oh, first of all, actually, before I start, I'd also like to. I'm very thankful for giving the opportunity to present here. I've been quite excited about this for a while, and yeah, I've just been looking at the kind of work that you guys have been doing, and it's a lot of really cool stuff, and I'm going to be paying attention from now on. Anyways, so now jumping in. So the title of my presentation is To Whom Does the Dream Belong? Negotiating Expertise in the Early History of the International Association for the Study of Dreams. So for those of you who might not be familiar with this organization, the IASD defines itself as a nonprofit, international, and multidisciplinary organization that is devoted to the pure and applied investigation of dreams and dreaming. So the purposes of the IASD, and I'm reading here from its mission statement, are to promote an awareness and appreciation of dreams in both professional and public arenas. So at first glance, the IASD doesn't really seem that different from other professional associations that you might already be familiar with. So it has its own international conference every year. It publishes a peer-reviewed journal. It has created some professional guidelines to regulate the practice of dream work. And I'll come back to this term later within the presentation. But when you take a closer look at the IASD, it actually becomes rather strange and unusual. And so in this presentation, I'm going to use the annual international conference as a way of illustrating this point. So the first thing that that's unusual about this conference is that it's open to the general public. So that means that anyone is invited to attend panels on the science of dreaming or maybe the history of dreaming. And they can participate in seminars on dream work. And anyone is able to interact with researchers at the end of their presentations during Q&A sessions alongside other professional researchers. And it also means that people are able to participate within seminars on dream work, able to participate in seminars on dream work alongside clinicians who might be attending the conference as a way of receiving continuing education credits, so advancing their professionalization. But the strangest feature about the conference, though, is definitely the social element that's been incorporated into its yearly structure. So yeah, it is very weird. So like the first thing is that there's a dream costume ball where everybody dresses up like a character from a dream that they've experienced that for whatever reason was particularly striking to them. And that image I have on the side is actually taken from one of the dream costume balls at the conference. It has its own dream telepathy contest, and there's also a dream art exhibit, excuse me. And so every year, there's other social events that are added to the program, like singles mixers. So like people who are single and also dream enthusiasts can, sort of mingle with other singles and and develop relationships. So like this is pretty unusual, and it might be tempting to kind of dismiss the social element of the conference as sort of a sideshow that's only really there to amuse the general public. And there's definitely an element of truth of this, because I've been told so much by people who have played an important role within creating the IASD. But the social element of the conference, though, that doesn't really explain the reason why the general public is encouraged to attend the conference every year to begin with. And it doesn't really address the issue of the fact that everybody seems interested in participating within these social events. It's not just the general public, but it's also dream researchers and professional dream workers. Okay, so I suggest in my dissertation that the creation of the International Association for the Study of Dreams is one of the most important and lasting legacies of a cultural phenomenon known as the grassroots Dreamwork Movement. So if some of you haven't heard of the Dreamwork Movement before today, I really wouldn't be that surprised, because there's only been one book that's been published on the history of the Dreamwork Movement to date, and that is William Domhoff's The Mystique of Dreams, and that was published back in 1985, I believe. So I'm going to spend the first part of this presentation giving an overview of the Dreamwork movement, and then having done that, I'll explain how the rise of this grassroots Dreamwork movement generated conflicting notions of what it means to have expertise in dreaming. And then the establishment of the IASD in 1983 has it developed out of these tensions and has provided some solutions to negotiating competing notions about what it means to have expertise in dreaming. So my specific claim, though, within the presentation is that the structure of the annual international conference is a way of protecting dreams from traditional abuses of power on behalf of dream researchers and mental health professionals. So I'm hoping that this is going to become clear as I go through the presentation. Yeah, so the earliest manifestation of what would become known as the Dreamwork movement appeared in the early 1970s in the form of a new genre of self-help literature that promised to help readers actualize their human potential. The clinical psychologist Anne Faraday, so there we go. The clinical psychologist Anne Faraday published her best-selling Dream Power in 1972, and this has become regarded as probably the first book written on dream work. And then 2 years later, the clinical psychologist Patricia Garfield, who would later become one of the founding original founders of the IASD, published Creative Dreaming. And then the closer you get to the end of the 1970s, the more books on dream work start getting published. So in 1978, John Sanford published Dreams and Healing as a way of reviving this long forgotten tradition of quote unquote dream work within the Christian tradition, putting aside the issues of this anachronistic terminology here. And then the following year in 1979, Gail Delaney, who would become the founding president of IASD, published Living Your Dreams. And that was the same year that Montague Ullman published Working with Dreams, which promoted the virtues of dream work within the context of a small group. So all of these books celebrated the value of the dream as a source of personal insight, creative inspiration, and spiritual guidance available to everybody in their waking life. These books always included real-life examples of men and women who learned how to work with their dreams as a way of making important decisions like getting married or divorced. There were examples of people using their dreams as a way of coming to terms with the loss of a loved one or a family member. And there were examples of people who were using their dreams as a way of navigating difficult life transitions, like becoming a parent, for example. But by the 1980s, some dream workers became interested in promoting the value of dream work as a way of promoting the value of dream work in social context, I'll put it that way. So the first thing was that dream workers started going to forward-looking corporations and marketing their skills to managers. So the idea was that the dream worker would go into a corporation, teach employees how to work with their dreams. And in the process of doing that, they would gain insight into maybe interpersonal conflicts that were getting in the way of the bottom line of the company. Or they might be able to cast light onto some of the reasons why certain employees might not be living up to their full creative potential. But then you start seeing dream work getting incorporated into other social institutions, like the family, for example, where you have parents who would teach their children how to work with their dreams as a way of inculcating the virtues of self-reliance and emotional resilience in their kids. And then educators in primary and secondary schools started incorporating dream work into the classroom as a way of improving the interpersonal skills of some of their students. One particular area where this was fruitful were concerned boys that were struggling with overly prescriptive gender norms. And then soon officials who were employed in the criminal justice system started using dream work as a way of instilling the skills of emotional resilience and emotional resilience in incarcerated populations, such as adolescents and adults as well. And so the idea is that when they were released back into the general population, they would then possess the psychological skills that were probably responsible for the reason why they committed a crime and went to jail in the first place. this is not my opinion. I'm just repeating the opinion of dream workers in this respect. But one of the most interesting applications of dream work that I've come across was used in like feminist circles as a way of consciousness raising. So through looking at their dreams, they could cast light onto the ways that a patriarchal society sort of colonized the mind in ways that were imperceptible otherwise in waking life. And so through gaining this awareness, it was possible to sort of exercise like the specter of patriarchy from the mind. But one of the things that I find particularly interesting about the practice of dream work was how it reconfigured the power relations in the field of dreaming. So traditionally, when somebody claimed to have expertise in dreams, it would probably mean that they had received advanced training in psychoanalysis or maybe analytical psychology. But what you started seeing happening in the Dreamwork movement is that popular psychologists would start to define expertise in terms of the ability to help somebody explore a dream and to uncover its meaning. And so that at the end of the process, they would actually know how to work with their own dreams so that they wouldn't have to rely on the trained judgment of a mental health professional to do it for them. And so at this point, I should also probably mention the role that sleep research played within the Dreamwork movement. I'm sure this is something that some of you are thinking about. So on the one hand, the discovery that everybody dreams multiple times every night suggested that anybody, even people who claim to never dream or people who never remember their dreams, it suggested that anybody could actually develop a productive relationship with their dreams if they invested the time and energy in learning how to do it. But also the recognition of the presence of dreams in the sleep cycle also normalized dreaming as well and helped these popular psychologists distance dreaming from the stigma of mental illness. And this would in turn, give people permission to take interest in their dreams because they didn't risk madness through toying with them. Now, with that having been said, I suggest in my dissertation that the establishment of the IASD in 1983 wouldn't have been possible if the practice of dream work hadn't become the focus of a grassroots movement. So it needed to be removed from the realm of popular literature and made the focal point of a cultural practice. And so to understand how this works, you need to take into account the role that publications like the Sundance Community Dream Journal and the Dream Network Bulletin played within the grassroots movement. And I could actually talk about these periodicals for a really long time because they're actually fascinating. It's as much as a social experiment as it is as a periodical in sort of like the traditional sense of the term. So the idea was that readers of these journals would find articles on how to experience certain types of dreaming. So there would be articles on how to practice dream incubation or lucid dreaming or telepathic dreams. The list really goes on and on. It's incredibly diverse. And then after having read these articles, the subscriber would then try and replicate the experience within their own experiences after going to sleep. And then in doing that, they would then write down their experiences, submit them to the editors of these journals, and sometimes their experiences would get published within the journal as well. But the crucial, the sort of amazing thing about these journals, though, is that they were able to render one of the most private and intimate type of experiences in Western culture into the focus of a social movement. So the actual practice of dreaming became a public act of sorts, where you were participating in a process with other people who were also readers of the journal. So in this context, the question of to whom does the dream belong? The answer is it really actually belongs to everybody, because everybody is learning to dream together at the same time. So now I claim that the success of these publications in bringing people into the Dreamwork movement actually produced tensions, though, between different groups of people inside the network. So, for example, as I mentioned a moment ago, traditionally mental health professionals were considered as kind of a source of danger in the Dreamwork movement, because historically, psychoanalysis, for example, would claim the privilege of being able to interpret the dreams on behalf of their patients. But what ended up happening, though, within the Dreamwork movement is that by the end of the 1970s and the early 1980s, some of the more established dream workers began creating their own training institutes. And so some of the people that would enroll in these programs were just members of the public who wanted to learn how to work with their dreams. But there was also a growing number of licensed clinicians who became interested in dream work as a way of expanding on their skill sets. And so this immediately introduced a potential conflict, because if the general public came to regard mental health professionals as a more credible or legitimate type professional identity than just people who enrolled in these training institutes, even though they didn't have a background in mental health care. If clinicians became regarded as more legitimate, then the Dreamwork movement could potentially become co-opted and taken over by mental health professionals. And in the worst case scenario, clinicians might actually start interpreting the dreams of their patients again. And this would actually destroy the meaning of dream work. And so one of the things that the creation of the IASD would help, would do is make sure that there were professional guidelines that would define dream work, so that it would remain, so that the meaning of the term would retain its value. So here we have the IASD Dreamwork Ethics Statement, where they write, systems of dream work that assign authority or knowledge of the dream's meanings to someone other than the dreamer can be misleading, incorrect, and harmful. Ethical dream work helps the dreamer work with his or her own dream images, feelings, and associations, and guides the dreamer to more fully experience, appreciate, and understand the dream. So now the other source of conflict that developed in the Dreamwork movement concerned the role of professional researchers in the movement. So again, historically, people in the Dreamwork movement tended to be very skeptical about the knowledge claims that scientists had about the nature and significance of dreams, because they typically rested on objective standards of evidence that undermined the dreamer's authority to define the meaning and significance of their own dream. But what ended up happening, though, is that as the movement continued to grow and expand, there were people who became interested in receiving academic degrees in anthropology or philosophy, social sciences, psychology as well. So people who were already interested in dreams enrolled in universities and became professional dream researchers. So like, this is a very different type of dream researcher than the other kind that was traditionally looked at with quite a bit of suspicion within the Dreamwork movement. And so because there was so much prejudice in the Dreamwork movement about professional researchers and their authority over dreaming, the IASD became necessary because it would provide an opportunity for everybody to actually have an opportunity to express or share their work with dreams and what it means to them to be a dreamer. And so the multidisciplinary mandate of the IASD, and this is really surprising, it wasn't based on an idea that dreaming should be studied from an interdisciplinary point of view, as if there's something about dreaming that naturally lends itself to interdisciplinary research models. It was actually created as a way of making sure that there are as many different perspectives brought to the experience of dreaming as possible. So I was quite surprised about this in my doctoral research. But now I think we can go back to the structure of the conference after everything that's just been said and start making sense of what's going on here. So so imagine you were a clinician and you attended the conference because you wanted to receive continuing education credits through participating in Dreamwork workshops. If half the seats were taken up by the people in the lay public, which meant that you weren't able to participate in that panel or within that session, you might get kind of frustrated. And I think we can probably imagine a similar situation happening if you were sitting in on a panel on the science of dreaming, but you weren't able to ask a question because there were so many people in the general public in the queue that there wasn't enough time for you to actually get your question out there. So now, I think that the reason why the general public attends the conference is because it's a way of reminding people that dreams don't belong to any particular group. We all dream. And so professional clinicians or professional researchers don't really have any they don't have any special rights in this regard. They might be able to bring unique insights to the experience of dreaming, but that doesn't mean that they own dreams, because again, it's a universal phenomenon that belongs to everybody. And I think that the social events at the IASD serve a similar function. So by getting people to come together and dress up like a character that appeared in their dreams, their identity is no longer grounded in whether or not they belong to the public, or whether or not they're a professional researcher or a clinician. Their identity becomes grounded within the actual experience of the dream itself. And so this is a way of negotiating difference within this highly eclectic and diverse environment where everybody becomes a dreamer. And so now going back to the question, to whom does the dream belong? I think the answer is that they belong to everybody, and therefore nobody in particular. So I think the basic premise of the IASD is that dreaming, to be human, is to dream. And because dreaming is a universal phenomenon, that means that everybody is an expert in their dream if they learn how to, if they invest the time and effort in learning how to make sense of them. And I think that the IASD has been designed in such a way as to preserve this point. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm just gonna remind all of our participants that we are taking questions at the end of the panel, but do feel free to start writing them in chat, and then I will try to curate them as much as possible after the panel. And so for now, we're gonna move on to our second speaker, Josianne BarrettMoran, who's at McGill University in Bioethics. Go ahead, Josianne.
Thank you so much, Liz. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me and for being here today. Thank you for organizing this, the sociability of sleep. My name is Josianne BarrettMoran, and I'll talk to you about including night owls in sleep medicine and research. Now I'll start my little PowerPoint. Whoops. Okay, there we go. So the first thing that I must tell you is that like about 20% of the general population and most teenagers, I am a night owl myself, which is just another way of saying that I have a late chronotype. And most night owls who have always gone to sleep later than their counterparts throughout their entire lives are generally suspected of having delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, or DSPD for short. I have received the diagnosis of DSPD a couple of years ago, and to be honest, my care trajectory did not go as well as I had hoped it had. It was in the public health care system, and so it's no coincidence that I'm presenting this topic today under the rubric critiquing norms in sleep and sleep research. So now that you know that I'm totally partial to my topic, the first thing that I will do is explain what exactly is delayed sleep-wake phase disorder. Since the principle behind the patient as partner approach is that patients with first-hand experience of a condition should be solicited in healthcare and research, I'll not limit myself to definitions offered by sleep experts. I'll also provide accounts of first-hand experiences. Then I'll walk you through the typical process for diagnosing DSPD, and this will give me a chance to introduce some of the most widely used assessment tools and questionnaires. Then we'll come to see that the specific wording used to collect information about sleep directly affects patients' responses and therefore affects their care trajectory and their health outcomes. So what exactly is DSPD? I'll start with my first definition here. It's coming from Tan Dang Wu. It's a neurologist who studies chronobiology. Defines DSPD as a consistent delay in sleep timing and an inability to fall asleep or wake up at conventional time. In this definition, delay is never isolated from convention. So therefore, intrinsic normative value is attributed to daytime wakefulness, I find in the first definition. So in our definition 2, we have Dawn Dorstites and Deirdre A. Conroy, who also study chronobiology, who rather define the SPDD as follows. It's a circadian rhythm sleep disorder characterized by a mismatch between a person's internal biological clock and societal norms. As a result of attempting to sleep out of sync with the internal biological clock, individuals with the SPD report a significantly prolonged sleep onset, difficulties waking in the morning, suboptimal sleep duration, and excessive daytime sleepiness. If the preferred schedule is allowed, sleep duration and maintenance are normal. So now in their definitions, it's specified that the disorder is not problematic in itself, but rather that it becomes symptomatic if it's experienced in conjunction with a lack of control over one's schedule. So this language is patient-centered insofar as, according to this definition, being normal depends on who the patient is and what their normal might be. Now on with the patient's definitions. So there is overlap between theirs and the others, but these contain additional details and insights that could only be brought about by lived experience. So let's start with Vanessa Barbara, who published an opinion piece in the New York Times titled, "What It's Like Living with a Chronic Circadian Rhythm Problem." She lists many things she does not have access to because she's a night owl, and feeling normal is one of these things. The first sentence of her article reads, "It's hard to feel normal when you wake up at 4 p.m. Later, she adds that according to conventional wisdom, going to bed early and waking up with the birds is a mere matter of habit and willpower. This misconception is widespread, even among doctors. And for a long time, I believed it." So she internalized stigma to the point of believing it, even though she felt that being active at conventional times made her exhausted, depressed, and sick. Effects that science has corroborated in the year after the article came out. So now science is after linking even DSWPD with suicidal ideation. So we're going beyond depression there. The second patient definition was written by a user of the Twitter account at We Are Disabled on May 3rd of last year. I quote, "Delayed sleep phase disorder or syndrome is relatively common. It's actually one of the most common circadian rhythm problems. But many people don't realize that they have it because society and doctors often brush the symptoms off as simply being bad habits or laziness. People with DSPD struggle to think clearly in the morning and do their best work at night. DSPD affects the entire body. This is especially noticeable in the digestive system. We are hungry at later times and we feel sick if we eat earlier, which can lead to stomach problems over time if we try to live on a regular schedule." So that's a chronotypical schedule. Many people with the SPD notice that they develop more and more health problems over time due to the physical and mental strain of living on a chronotypical schedule. So attempts to fix, in brackets, our schedule can actually be harmful. It's an almost purely social disability. If it wasn't for the way society caters to morning larks, owls would be fine. Unfortunately, we're at a severe disadvantage when it comes to employment, store hours, social activities, etc. End of quote. Wrong assumptions associating DSPD symptoms with behaviors and character traits, as well as vices and even sins, make it harder for night owls to seek medical help. And we have media studies people here. If you want, if you have like a TV tropes that comes to mind, you can share them in the chat. Like I know that one trope would be that the annoying person has a sleep apnea machine and they bring it to the sleepover or something. So it's really widespread to the point of touching very popular culture. So these wrong assumptions do have consequences because if the SPD goes undiagnosed because a person just thought, oh, this is just my problem for behaving a certain way, it's not medical in nature, then when it goes undiagnosed, there is higher risk for depression, diabetes, obesity, altered immune system, and poor cardiovascular health. And there's also more risk of dying while driving. So this is really not negligible. For those who do reach the patient status and so they want help, the sleep medicine community, fortunately, is on the same page when it comes to diagnosing the SWPD. The authors of practice parameters for the clinical evaluation and treatment of circadian rhythm sleep disorders, they attest to the fact that patient self-assessment is always considered. So typically when the SPD is suspected, a first meeting with a sleep specialist is scheduled, and during this meeting, a conversation takes place. Things can go wrong from the start here. For example, most sleep specialists know that the SPD makes it hard for their patients to wake up and think clearly in the morning, but they will still schedule the first meeting in the morning, where there's increased probability that their patients will either miss their appointment or have a harder time clearly grasping the issues at hand. There's also a risk of miscommunication. Words are not used the same way by academics, by sleep experts, by clinicians, by patients, etc. So some associate the word tired with sleepiness, while others associate it with fatigue. Some call delayed sleep-wake phase a disorder, while others call it a syndrome, other a condition, disability, trouble, problem. So here is issue 44 of sleep, where they acknowledge that some key terms are often used interchangeably. They address common confusion and define each term. So we get to know what they mean in the context of that particular reading. So that's a positive criticism, I guess, because I think they neatly avoided the risk for miscommunication that way. And having something like that at that first meeting with the sleep specialist would be incredibly helpful. So there it is, it's on the screen. That's the solution right there. The authors of Implicit Normativity in Evidence-Based Medicine, a plea for integrated empirical ethics research, claim that patient autonomy should not only start to be considered once all the empirical facts are presented, but rather during the production and presentation of information, when new information gets to interact with pre-existing values. Even prior to diagnosis, empirical information implicitly associated with value judgments is presented to patients suspected to have DSPD. For example, someone who chooses to say, I am unproductive instead of saying I'm tired, there is already an implicit value judgment that you need to be productive in this economy. And there's a competitive aspect that some other panelists touched upon. Assuming that the first meeting actually goes well, patients are then asked to fill questionnaires, like the Horn-Ornsberg Morningness Eveningness Questionnaire, or the Munich Chronotype Questionnaire, and to write sleep logs or journals over a period of 1 week to 3 months on average. This documentation is to be reviewed and analyzed during the following meeting with the same sleep specialist, 1 week to 3 months time from the first meeting. And again, this can quickly go wrong because some questionnaires need to be actualized. And I know that Elizaveta is kind of an expert with the questionnaires, so I'm looking forward to discussing this. So for example, most questionnaires do not present the patient with I do not know options. in a multiple choice question, or they used the word day for a 24-hour cycle. But there's a problem because day is heavily polysemic. So the word day can mean a solar day of 24 hours beginning at midnight. It could mean daytime or daylight. So that's just the time when there's light outside between one night and the next. And it's used in a social way also, where when we say, how was your day? Or a work day, a school day, a business day, a legal day, it's a time that's established by usage or law that has nothing to do with the 24-hour cycle. So depending on your understanding of the word day or night, you might answer differently in your questionnaire. Also, the wording found in the questionnaires may be confusing when it comes to work-free time, as to whether it literally means work-free time or whether it figuratively means time when one is free to do as one decides. And people with families will relate to this one. Maybe they don't work that day, they don't have to set an alarm clock for work, but they will wake up early because they have to drop their children at daycare. So it won't make any difference whether they on their schedule, whether they worked or not. On the screen is a study where they analyzed all the phrasing from the most prominent sleep questionnaires around the world. They assessed event definitions. So for example, is this when you went to bed, like you physically went in your bed, or is this when you were 100% asleep or felt yourself becoming asleep? Context also. So for example, were you free to choose your schedule? And or time frame. So time frame, we saw this with the word day. So were we talking about 24-hour cycles or about when there was light outside in the window? You will see with this example that I took from their paper how phrasing can become a vector for night owl exclusion from sleep medicine. Imagine that you work all night on your New York Times article because, contrary to popular belief, you're quite the prolific writer when you're left alone. So you did not sleep last night, you wrote. You woke up at 4 p.m. How would you answer the first question? How many hours did you sleep last night? Would you skip it? Would you write an explanation over it and try to explain it to your doctor? Would you say the truth and write 0 hours? This could mess up your total score on the questionnaire and make you risk misdiagnosis. It could also go way beyond that, because your incorrect data could be used in biobanks and national surveys, and this would feed into the cycle of misrepresentation and stigma perpetuation. So we have to be sure as a patient that we say the truth, but sometimes it's just not made easy with the question that's in front of us. So maybe you just wait until your next appointment and make it clear with the sleep specialist. But then this could delay your diagnosis, so possibly by several months. And in these several months, you're more at risk of plenty of things, including dying, driving. So then again, we have no way of knowing what the people who created the questionnaires want. And if we're working backwards from the question, we're already, and trying to guess what they want, we're already doing more than a patient should do. And we're also maybe making a mistake in our assumptions and our interpretation. Not having full access to the intention or logic guiding their diagnosis process exclude patients from becoming informed, active players in their care regimen. And I know that the next panelist is also in bioethics, so probably we'll explore how much autonomy is a key principle here. To give you an idea of how patients with suspected DSPD have dealt with this, many admit that they have lied. They have told their sleep specialist that they had a night job, even if it was not true, just so they could receive a night shift sensitive questionnaire that could be more representative of their natural sleep cycles. The next step after self-assessment, then other assessments from external point of view come into play, because you might be scheduled for observation at the sleep lab. This step is often used to rule out other sleep troubles like obstructive sleep apnea, narcolepsy. They have common symptoms with the SPD, so that this must be cleared out. And getting an appointment to a lab can take months. Before going to the lab, you may be asked to abstain from napping, eating, drinking certain caffeinated drinks, because they want to make sure that you sleep as soundly as possible when you're there. The premises are adapted so they are comfortable, they can promote the best results. So even when your body is covered with electrodes and wires and stuff, and Sandra Hubert showed pictures of that. So even where you're not feeling like exactly everything is normal, then the temperature is perfect. There are soundscape, lighting, great bedding, everything, access to a closed bedroom. So good sleep can happen. But there's one problem. You mobilize all those people and equipments, and you schedule a patient suspected of having DSPD for a night observation, and they risk just not being able to fall asleep or to produce readable data. And this is what happened to me. So my symptoms were clearly, I never sleep at night, and they scheduled me for a lab observation at night. This is actually expensive for the system, and nothing happened, no readable data. So from there are other tools that can be, you can have a meeting for example, actigraphy, thermometry, polysomnography. A lot of tools can be considered, but these are not routine options. They're not readily available. So I'll just concentrate on the self-assessment part. As a DSPD patient, or as someone who cares about the night owl in their lives, let's say, you have three ways of getting involved to the advancement of more inclusive sleep assessment tools and tool actualization. So just making the tools that we have more relevant, more easy to understand, etc. You could become a sleep advocate. You could participate in surveys and studies as a subject, or you could become a patient partner. So the first option is on the screen. That's sleep advocacy. This is what sleep advocacy looks like. It's a pretty active community. We have let's say, the advocacy section of the Society of Research on Biological Rhythms, the Circadian Sleep Disorder Network. We have the policy changing advocacy of fellow night owl Alexandra Wharton. And we have Start School Later that focuses on teens. We have Save Standard Time and Be Society. You can get involved with those. Here is what participating to a study looks like. So you can see that people are always wanted, very easy to find. These are from across the province. They come from universities, labs, hospitals. The problem with this option is that you might be excluded pretty quickly. Speaking from personal experience, scientists are always looking for pure data. So they will exclude you, let's say, if for a number of reasons. If you're pregnant, you have diabetes, you take medication, you are depressed, you have metal pieces in your body, anywhere in your body, that's for MRIs, you're excluded, and so on and so on. So while it's easy to find, it's not easy to access. And my main way of engaging, becoming a patient partner. As a bioethics scholar, I have met a couple of patient partners on Zoom calls like this one, but never one that was a patient partner for sleep medicine. Also, when I wished to become one, I couldn't find any website, any poster, no clinician have ever talked to me about it. So there's kind of no option right now in Quebec to become a patient partner for sleep med. But I hope that today I have shown that with the patient as partner framework gaining ground in other levels of medicine and care, and with paternalistic approaches losing ground as a result, a lot is already in place for this opportunity to come to exist. The sleep medicine community is always looking to get better, and they have shown time and time again that they were open to document actualization. Sorry. Questionnaires have been adapted, night shift sensitive, children sensitive, questions about were they valid enough for this community, for that community. And so everything is there. Now we're only missing the partners that so badly want to be let in. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Josianne, for this talk. I remind everybody that we will have a question and answer period soon after our next speaker. So, but in the meantime, please do feel free to put your thoughts as they arise in chat, and I will do my best to moderate as we come to the end of this session. Our next speaker is Kristie Sirota from University of Toronto in the public health domain. Go ahead.
So hi there, my name is Kristie Serota. I'm a PhD candidate at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. And I am so delighted to be part of this panel. I hope that my presentation speaks really well to the previous two presentations, and that following this panel, we can have a really great, fruitful discussion. So I'm going to be talking about Unstitching the Sleep Industrial Complex, Reflections on the Medicalization and Commodification of Sleep. Okay, so in the presentation, I'm going to be presenting the biocultural arena of sleep, and specifically the sleep industrial complex. So I will talk through the medicalization of sleep, commodification of sleep, and then give some reflections on neoliberal personhood and sleep. And then I'm really interested in sites of resistance. So I have one media representation of resistance to the sleep industrial complex, and then my own project, Quilting Resistance. And then finally, I have some ideas for next steps or new directions. So whether or not we've been diagnosed with a formal sleep disorder, we all experience sleep disturbances from time to time, whether that's from jet lag, shift work, stress, and anxiety. And there's a huge market of products that sell us the promise of sleep. And on the screen here are just, really a few of them. Perhaps you've purchased some of these products yourself. I certainly have. And maybe they worked for you, or maybe they haven't. So throughout this presentation, when I talk about the commodification of sleep, these are the kinds of products that I'm referring to. I'm not suggesting that these things are good or bad, or that they should or should not exist. But I think it's very interesting to reflect for a minute on the money that gets made from creating, marketing, and selling these kinds of products, and who really benefits from them. All right, so Ehlers and Krupar use the concept of biocultures as a methodology to investigate arenas within our social world where biomedicine and culture intersect. Biocultures are defined as, quote, health issue terrains wherein biomedical logics extend beyond the confines of medicine to govern populations and discipline individuals, end quote. And that's Krupar and Ehlers 2021. So using Foucault's epistemology, Ehlers and Krupar explore how biocultures, such as how we think about obesity or finding a cure for cancer, how these things are constructed through particular truth claims that govern our spheres of knowledge, experience, and practice. These truth claims often originate within biomedical logics and are powerful drivers of our cultural understandings of health and illness. So biocultures structure the societal discourses that influence medical and pharmaceutical practices, our economic policies, our public health initiatives, as well, of course, as our business initiatives. These cultural understandings and discourses work to govern our relationships with our bodies and structure how we understand our own health and illnesses. So one aspect of the biocultural arena of sleep is the sleep industrial complex that we see in the middle of my little diagram here. The sleep industrial complex works to construct sleeplessness as a medical disorder. Barbie and colleagues in 2018 say that it describes, they describe how the sleep industrial complex is fueled by the medicalization of sleep and neoliberal market logics that transform our sleep into a consumer product. So I've put together this diagram to try and help us break down, deconstruct, and explore the different areas of the sleep industrial complex. So of course, here I have medicalization, commodification, and biomedicine as the main drivers. So first, biomedicine. So biomedicine tells us that sleep-wake cycles are intrinsic and genetically programmed. They're governed by the suprachiasmatic nuclei located in the anterior basal hypothalamus. And they do acknowledge that there are some social and environmental influences to our intrinsic circadian cycles. However, biomedicine has really been critiqued for being individualistic, universalizing, and also reductionist. I'll move up here now to medicalization. So medicalization is the process by which an ever-widening range of different human experiences become defined, experienced, and treated as medical conditions. So instead of conceptualizing a broad range of different circadian rhythms as being the result of just natural human diversity, those that stray from the socially acceptable standard that fit into the normal school or workday are constructed as aberrant and in need of treatment. So in between these two here, we have sleep disorders. So when we have brain-based understanding of sleep, this leads to sleep-wake differences or diversity becoming classified as a medical disorder. And down to commodification. So new markets then emerge to meet the demand for treatment for these sleep disorders or disturbances. Products are created, they're advertised to us, and they're sold to consumers. And I argue they're selling us the promise of sleep. So up here to personal responsibility. So we're taught to be good neoliberal subjects, to take responsibility for our own sleep cycles and to ensure that we rise early to improve our health and well-being. And as it's been noted, this can be very difficult for some of us. And then finally, down to the bottom, individual treatment. So treatments may include pharmaceuticals, cognitive behavioral therapy, which I saw mentioned in the chat recently, light therapies, etc. And you'll notice that all of these treatments are really focused on changing the individual and their biology. So the lack of adequate treatment leads to the classification of some sleep disturbances as chronic illnesses. All right, so just like the former presenter, I'm also very interested in delayed sleep-wake phase disorder. And I'm interested in using this particular disorder as an example to show how biomedical knowledge regimes structure how we understand, study, and experience and treat sleep disorders. So I'll quickly run through the diagnostic criteria here. So A, there's a significant delay in the phase of the major sleep episode in relation to the desired or required sleep time and wake-up time, as evidenced by a chronic or recurrent complaint by the patient or a caregiver of inability to fall asleep and difficulty awakening at a desired or required clock time. It's been present for at least 3 months. C, when patients are allowed to choose their own personal schedule, they will exhibit improved sleep quality and duration for age and maintain a delayed phase of the 24-hour sleep-wake pattern. D really gets into what the former presenter was saying about how we study and diagnose this disorder, so through sleep logs, autography monitoring, etc. And they demonstrated delay in the timing of the habitual sleep period. And then finally, E, the sleep disturbance is not better explained by another current sleep disorder, medical or neurological disorder, mental disorder, medication use, or a substance use disorder. So the medical model of sleep disorder is really based on the notion that there is a baseline, quote unquote, normal sleep schedule. A historical or anthropological analysis will show us that there's actually a lot of variability in what is considered normal sleep throughout different cultures and across history. So what we consider normal today, or what is called desired or required in the diagnostic criteria, is based upon our contemporary capitalist society and the 9-to-5 workday. What I find really fascinating is that DSWPD is considered a chronic illness, despite the fact that a potential cure for the illness actually exists right here within the diagnosis. When patients are allowed to choose their own schedules, they exhibit improved sleep quality. Thus, what makes this a chronic illness is not that it cannot be treated, for the treatment appears simple. We should acknowledge and allow for greater diversity. From this critical view, this disorder doesn't exist within the anterior basal hypothalamus of the individual, but rather the disorder is in the misalignment between social and cultural expectations of normalcy and the biological diversity that actually exists between all of us humans. So our contemporary notions of where, when, how long, and with whom we should sleep are culturally, socially, and historically constructed. Thus, I argue they can be deconstructed and restructured differently. But of course, there is no money to be made off of people in the public just radically accepting their natural circadian rhythms. In fact, this type of resistance challenges the social norms engendered by neoliberal ideology about how we ought to optimize our bodies and what it means to be productive. So I'm interested in resistance. And I argue that radically embracing sleeplessness is an affront to the sleep industrial complex that profits off of the medicalization and the commodification of our sleep and our sleeplessness. So I'm really interested in exploring this question of what would happen if, instead of diagnosing sleep-wake phase disorders as medical disorders, we instead shifted towards thinking of them in terms of differences or diversity. So I'm now going to give 2 examples of what it might look like to embrace one's own natural circadian rhythm. And the first one comes from a television series called Modern Love, which is available on Amazon Prime, in the episode titled The Night Girl Finds a Day Boy. So we watch as our main character, Zoe, navigates the world at night when most of New York City is asleep. She embraces her diagnosis of DSWPD and structures her daily life in a way that challenges our normative ideas about sleep. She highlights the beauty and the peace of being awake at night when most others are sleeping. So this diagnosis is not just something that she tolerates, but she actually finds beauty in it. She appears to do this successfully until she falls in love with a school teacher who inhabits an entirely opposite schedule from her. So he challenges her to change her sleep schedule in order to fit more closely with his, and of course, this does not go so well. It inevitably causes issues in their relationship. And I think it's really interesting to look at the different conversations and dynamics that happen within this show to see different stereotypes about DSWPD that start to arise. So for example, at one point he says, "I just think it's a convenient condition for an introvert who doesn't maybe really want to engage with the world anyway." And she responds sarcastically, "Because this has made my life so convenient." So this is the first time that I've seen a depiction of DSWPD in the media, and I was really struck by this particular character's conviction and defiance towards treatment. Her resistance to the sleep industrial complex is portrayed as an alternative mode of being in the world, and this to me was just very refreshing to see. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own project, Quilting Resistance. So I too have displayed all of the symptoms of DSWPD since infancy. I've never been able to fall asleep at a quote unquote normal hour, and waking up for school and work has always been exhausting. So I've spent the majority of my life feeling sleep deprived. Then suddenly the pandemic happened, and I was working on my doctorate from home and realized I could just make my own sleep schedule. I could stay awake until 3 in the morning doing my work and then sleep until 11 a.m., and that was no problem at all. Learning to embrace my own body's natural rhythm required me to deconstruct everything that I had been taught about the habits that are needed for health, productivity, and success. Radically accepting my sleeplessness as a facet of my existence and not a medical disorder is an expression of self-acceptance, and I think also an act of self-care. It is an affront to this sleep industrial complex that had me believe there was something intrinsically wrong with me for being unable to fall asleep at a socially acceptable time. So recently, I've also learned that quilting is an act of care. Quilts are social texts that have been used throughout history to mark important transitions in our lives. So things like births and weddings and deaths. They contain symbolic messages and stories. So during the pandemic, I learned to quilt, and I constructed this quilt to mark my resistance to the sleep industrial complex and my radical acceptance of sleeplessness. I just got tired of consuming the hegemonic construction of sleeplessness as a disorder and trying to cure it through disordered consumption. So possible futures. So I'm very interested in discussing what folks in this session think about possible futures or ways forward. A couple of different things that I've been thinking about are how can we shift our way of seeing sleep-wake disorders differently towards diversity? So could it be something akin to how we see neurodiversity currently, such as in this Forbes article, really accepting that in the workplace? And also the impact of workplace flexibility initiatives that have cropped up during the pandemic. So how has allowing employees more control over their own work schedules impacted those who have circadian rhythm differences? And then finally, I would be very interested in reading about what decolonizing sleep might look like from an Indigenous perspective. And that's all from me. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kristie, for this amazing talk. All right, so we're gonna do a little question answer session right now. We started the session a little later. Alana, until when do we have for Q&A? Originally, I think it's until 1. What is the current, or Alex?
I think we had 20 minutes for the Q&A, and so
okay.
Yeah, let's see how that goes.
So we'll be basically on time. Okay, all right. So I see in the comments there's a lot of reactions to all the 3 of your talks, and perhaps we can start with reactions to Ryan's talk. As a disclosure, myself, I'm also a member of IASD, and in fact, I don't know if I'm pointing fingers here, but the IASD's current president is on our Zoom today.
Oh, really?
She would like to say a couple of words, but I'm not gonna force her to do that. So there's a lot of some of the comments from IASD members are actually really kind of going in a direction of a very sympathetic direction with your perspective that this is a space of various forms of exchange, and indeed, all the IASD meetings I've attended have been very eclectic and very fun. Also, full of scientists as well. All right, so maybe first, I would ask if anyone wants to raise their hand and just ask questions to Ryan, or comment on Ryan's perspective from either IASD people or from people who are curious about IASD. Does anyone want to? Feel free to unmute yourselves. And yes, hi, Mark. Right. Mark is asking, there was a question on the model used by them. Right. It was highly collective from the start, with many of top researchers involved, as well as late dream research applications. It's a comment, right? It's a comment. Have you been to ISD, Ryan?
You know what? I should have raised this point at the very beginning. I actually haven't been to an ISD conference, and I realized because I'm talking about it, I probably should. But I'm really happy that there are some ISAD members here, actually, because it's a way of sort of like test driving, your workout when there are people who are involved within the association like that. And it's been really refreshing to see some people actually understanding what I'm talking about here. Academia can be such a siloing kind of experience. Okay, so we have here.
Yes, great. Okay, so I think first question was from Rizome. First hand, I think, raised.
Rizome, hi, I'm Bernard Welt. I know Mark and Michelle and Elizaveta. And so I mentioned writing one out earlier that I've been going to IASD conferences and have been a member since 2000. And I'll just mention I've never been to a dream ball. Oh, so no. There are, So there are people who don't go. So it would be, in technical terms, an error to say that everyone goes. However, a lot of what you focus on, the notion of the dream movement, it's very, very important to the way IASD works, because as you say, it's multidisciplinary, but there is inside the way that you talked about it, a sort of distinction between clinicians and the other people, clinicians and the lay people. So we know there are clinicians, we know that there are lab dream researchers, but there are quite a few people like me. I'm in the humanities. There's a reason that philosophers come. There's a reason that people in consciousness studies come. And we do give presentations, we do give papers. I would mention, for example, in what I do, because my background's in literature and film studies, there are things that dream studies still has to learn from narratology, which is very advanced in literary and film studies. And there are lots of things that people in film studies need to learn from dreaming, because as many of you know, a lot of film studies is still stuck in Freudian and post-Freudian stuff and hasn't really thought very much about what actually happens to be my specialty, the analogies between dreams and films that are made generally in the culture, where they come from, what they do. So for example, what I would give anyone as the basic guide to what's going on in dream studies is Jennifer Windt's book, Dreaming, and she's a philosopher. And she puts a lot of other people together. So I just want to mention that about that. And I also put in something earlier, just as a reminder in applications. As the Dreamwork movement grew, there have been a lot of people, yes, they're looking for alternatives to traditional, clinicians and therapists and so forth by doing something in a group together. I've worked with a group of ill people in Dreamwork. There are a lot of people who go to Dreamwork for healing circles, as they're very often called. And I think that's kind of outside the categories.
Yeah, I really didn't speak very much about the healing side of things. So thank you for pointing that out. I was actually the Dreamwork movement is such an incredibly rich and fascinating. So that I was kind of having a hard time in preparing for this presentation with 20 minutes of sort of getting bringing everybody into this. Yeah, your point is well taken about there are plenty of about the focus that I put on clinicians, for example, and dream researchers, because there's so many more people that have been brought into the movement that like yourself, for example.
I'm talking about it in part because I came in 2000 and looked around and saw that everybody was doing things in psych departments, and I was doing things in an interdisciplinary humanities program. But anyway, thanks.
Too. Yeah.
So there's a lot of us you may still want to have a little chat with at some point.
Thanks, Bernard.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks.
And thank you for your comments.
Yeah, Michelle, you're on.
Yeah, I think as Bernard just said, I don't want to take up too much time because I know there's so many questions for so many of the speakers. But Ryan, I thought that was a really fascinating presentation. One of the things I love about IASD is that it's so multidisciplinary, because I come from more of the scientist researcher perspective, and I don't think I would have necessarily had the exposure to dream work and to dream arts and just talking with people from the public about dreaming if it hadn't been for the conference, and it's really helped me, I think, as a scientist even, to have a broader perspective. And similar to an event like this, I really appreciate being able to interact with people on a topic that I'm studying, but people who come from different perspectives. So it's been really nice. But I would love to talk with you further and read your work if you get in touch.
I'd love to continue this conversation. One of the things that when I was in the process of putting together, collecting material for my dissertation, I was conducting interviews with some of the people who have been involved with the establishment of the ISAD. And one of the things that I found so striking about when I was talking to these people who came from different backgrounds and had different interests was just how the sort of, I would say that there's an openness to ambiguity and difference that I've found quite striking. I've heard other people who have come from the sciences, for example, who have said something very similar about having the exposure to different points of view has provided a kind of perspective on their work that maybe wouldn't have been possible, or maybe that wouldn't have happened. And I found it just such a pleasure to speak to people, because everybody was just so sociable. I put it in a way like that, where it's just a lot of really interesting people. I think that it really speaks to how the way that the actual study of dreams can it changes you, or it can change you. At least it has with me anyways. I dream differently now at the end of my project than I did at the beginning, which is one of the most sort of fascinating parts of it. And just, I used to be really interested in knowing what dreaming is, but I'm not really too concerned about that anymore. That's been one of the things that's come out of this project. Anyways, so thank you. And I'd love to continue this too as well. I think you were asking about the periodicals. I'm looking in somebody was asking. Anyways.
Come to the conference this summer.
Pardon me?
You should come to the conference this summer.
It's being held virtually, isn't it?
No. In person
this year.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, terrific. That's definitely something that I'm going to have to solve, and I'm also going to get involved with some Dreamwork groups. I want to see what's going on with that.
Awesome. All right, thank you. Yes, Josh, go ahead.
Hi there. I just liked all the talks very much. Really great synergy between Josianne's and Kristie's. And Kristie, I just had a really sort of a very technical question. How did you decide what kinds of colors and patterns and textures to put into the quilt? What were some of the stylistic or aesthetic choices that you made, and how do they map on to the more kind of conceptual and critical questions that you're raising around the sleep industrial complex?
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, so this is something that I talk about in the article that I published in Art Research International, which is, I think, how you kind of found me and invited me here. But so the quilt is intended to resemble the night sky. So I picked fabrics that looked like stars or galaxies, very dark colors with bright accents. And the intention was to create a physical object that could be wrapped around oneself, as in blanketed in the stars, accepting the night in a comforting, cozy way, as opposed to something that we are fearful of or are frustrated by, because it's a very frustrating experience to not be able to fall asleep when you want to. And then on the back of the quilt, there's a large symmetrical cross that is a symbol of often like hospitals or ambulances and things like that. And so it was kind of an ironic nod to that medicalization, the field of medicine, to put that symbol on there as well.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Me too. I felt there was quite a great uncanny synergy between Josianne's and Kristie's talks, and just as Alana put in chat, it made me feel seen as well. All of us night owls who are consistently readapting to the outside world's demands. Certainly, in my case, my child needs to have breakfast at 6 a.m. right? So it's kind of I mean, I do like my child better than my sleep, I guess, but sometimes my body kind of protests. But so I guess let's see what kind of questions they have. So I was Kristie, I was really I liked both your talks very much, and I was wondering about this whole idea of sleep industrial complex. I have not read the articles you were citing, but I've always made that joke in my own work because I work in social and transcultural psychiatry and projects on sociality of sleep, which some of it has to do with this exact thing, right? Like how our methods and our approaches to sleep science are sometimes missing a bunch of people, who are perhaps sleeping differently, but also who are adapting, in many different ways to the external demands. So it's not all kind of negative. And I admit as well, like I do write my articles into like early mornings sometimes, and it does indeed sometimes feel very strange. What Josianne was mentioning, like how many hours do you sleep per night? And I'm like, well, okay, well, who says I sleep at night? It's like this is a big assumption that I sleep at night. So yeah, I thought these were really great presentations. Are there any questions for Josianne and Kristie right now? Does anyone want to unmute themselves?
Also, Marta wrote something interesting in the chat.
I'm trying to find now. There's a lot of that we can do. Of course, yes, the labs can do daytime PSG. There has to be enough interest in doing that for sure. Yes, and the idea of a patient partner it's hugely interesting, and actually, as also Cedric was mentioning before today, there's no really such thing as phenomenology of sleep, right? I mean, there kind of is, but also there kind of isn't. And so the first person perspectives, certainly ISD is really trying to make sure that first person perspectives are included in scientific study of dreams, but perhaps not so much in scientific study of sleep quite yet. And indeed, we will have a workshop on sleep questionnaires at some point soon in April within the Sociability of Sleep project. Yeah, I was wondering, Josianne, also what are the next steps of this kind of project? Like, are you collaborating with other with Quebec sleep research centers or labs?
So there is like some movement, and I suspect that Marta's example also stemmed from United States or Europe. And maybe I forgot to mention that most of my examples came from Quebec and Canada. So it's just not going at the same rhythm like where I live, where I am, where I'm speaking from. But we could kind of get inspired by what's happening in the United States and Europe in matters of increasing accessibility to day labs and having at least one patient partner by kind of research unit and a care unit. And also coming back to Marta's question, where if the patient is coming in with a problem, why are we criticizing the medical complex for not having a perfectly tailored solution? And I wanted to maybe bring a nuance, and maybe Kristie, you can add something right after. So sometimes actually the patient is not going to seek medical help for the sole purpose of having a solution at the end, but rather to gain credibility. And this is directly informed by the stigma. So they will want, let's say, a signed medical paper that they can show coworkers and bosses and teachers. So they don't actually want to medicalize their case. They're only wanting to have another credible voice that says they are not lazy and they could do better and they can be useful and wonderful collaborators if only they were allowed to control their schedules. And I hope that this clarifies that, because it's an awesome question. And it's a question that I had to ask myself before choosing my topic. Great.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, awesome. Kristie.
Yeah, I can just add to that a little bit. I definitely agree with you and what you've said, Josianne. The idea of medicalizing ourselves by going to the doctor because we perceive that we have a problem, I think this sort of we can take it all the way back to how do we understand ourselves and how do we understand what health is? So like, what are the discourses that are circulating in society that tell us what it is to be healthy or what it is to be ill? And so these discourses and understandings of self then influence how we see our own bodies and our own problems within the body, if that makes sense. Does that help to answer Marta, your question? I know you said you're a bit puzzled by this double discourse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if I may contribute my 2 cents here, because a lot of it aligns very well with a couple of papers I'm working right now, and I would love to talk to the two of you at some point, maybe brainstorm. In transcultural psychiatry, we often use the term idioms of distress, right? And so idioms of distress are the ways in which minds and bodies manifest different forms of distress, and those are often culturally bound, right? So actions like seeking out care and actions like seeking out care, actions like adopting normative frameworks for what it's like, to be healthy or to be ill, right? All of those things, they manifest differently depending on a particular context, right? So just like you said, Kristie, like in the sleep industrial complex. And I love the phrase. I always thought that I came up with it, but I guess many people came up with it. This has been, I first used it at a bar with friends, of course, discussing the sleep technologies. But really, so the kind of normative, let's say, public health campaigns are often about sleeping at the right time, sleeping the right amount of hours, sleeping the right way, right? And so certainly as much as feeling like you're okay can create really strong and powerful placebo effects, being consistently told that you're not does create nocebo effects, right? Potentially, and nocebo effects do then manifest themselves as symptoms of disease due to expectation of disease, right? So this is like a very interesting question about, there's a lot of other questions like co-sleeping, right? In some cultures is completely, normalized and actually expected, versus our culture, which is, which very much valorizes the time, the kind of milestone of a child finally being able to sleep alone, right? So anyway, so this is, I think, maybe I'm thinking that maybe idioms of distress can be an idea that is useful for both of your projects as well. Right. Well, thank you very much. I think we're out of time. Are we? Yeah. Thank you. That was a really great panel. I enjoyed it very much.